The morning she was denied, the sky didn't have the decency to fall. Lena Asheville remembered that later, standing in the great hall of the Ironville Pack, with 200 wolves watching, and the chandelier's gold light landing on her like something kind, like something that didn't understand what was happening below it. She remembered thinking that the sky should have cracked open. The floor should have given way. Something should have marked the moment in the world the way it was marking her inside. Instead, Alpha Cade Draveth stood at the head of the long table, in front of his council and his generals and the visiting delegation from the Ashwood territories, and looked at her like she was a stranger he'd never asked to stand there. "I don't know this woman," he said. His voice was steady, even, like gravel smoothed by a long river. "There is no bond here. Whatever she believes she felt, she's mistaken." A murmur moved through the crowd the way a current moves under ice, present but invisible at the surface. Lena's wolf howled inside her chest, not in grief, in fury. She was 23 years old, the third daughter of a border pack healer, and she had never once in her life asked for anything from anyone above her station. She had not gone looking for him. The bond had simply arrived 2 weeks prior like weather, one afternoon in the market quarter when Cade Draveth had walked past the apothecary's stall, and their eyes had met, and the whole world had reorganized itself around that fact. She had felt the moon's mark settle in her blood the way her mother said it would, warm and deep and certain as her own heartbeat. She had waited. She had been patient. She had told no one because she had wanted to approach him privately, quietly, with dignity. He had found out through his scouts before she had the chance. And now he stood here, in front of everyone, and called her a liar. "She's not mistaken." The voice came from behind her, and Lena didn't turn because she knew if she turned she would cry, and she had decided some minutes ago that she would not do that here, not once. It was Petra, her childhood friend, small and dark-haired and constitutionally incapable of staying quiet when something was wrong. "The whole room can smell the bond, Alpha Draveth. Half of your own council is looking at you sideways right now." Cade's jaw tightened. The girl is a border pack healer's daughter with no wolf-grade rank, no territorial claim, and no standing in this hall. The bond is, he paused, and Lena saw him choosing his words the way a man chooses which road to walk, knowing one of them is wrong, an anomaly. It will fade. "That's not how bonds work," Petra said. "Petra," Lena said it quietly. She did turn then. Not to cry, she had been right about herself, it turned out, but to look at her friend with the specific calm of someone who has decided to feel nothing until she is somewhere private. "Thank you. We're leaving." She walked out of the hall with her chin level and her hands loose at her sides, and she did not once look back at Cade Draveth, who stood in his golden hall with his council and his generals and watched her go. What she didn't know then, what none of them knew, was that the book had already opened. Penumbra was a word healers used for the shadow space between states, not day and not night, not living and not gone. Her mother had taught her that, had pressed the word into her memory the same summer she had pressed dried wolfsbane between the pages of an old journal and told Lena that some things were written before we were born, and the best a healer could do was learn to read them rather than fight them. The journal was old. It was always old. It had passed through Asheville hands for 4 generations, and what was written inside it was not, strictly speaking, a record of anything that had happened. It was, her mother had explained once, more like a record of things that were happening in other places, other versions of the world where the same souls had made different choices. Her great-grandmother had called it a consciousness ledger, a map of the spaces between. Lena had always thought that was poetic nonsense. She revised that opinion 3 weeks after the hall, when the journal began writing itself. She woke at 3 in the morning to the smell of ink, real ink, not the memory of it, and found the journal open on her workbench with fresh text covering 2 pages in her own handwriting. Handwriting she had not put there. She read it twice, standing in her nightclothes in the cold room with a candle guttering in the draft from the window, And then she sat down carefully on her workbench stool and read it a third time. It described a place. A woman standing in a forest at the edge of something she couldn't see, standing at the boundary between what had been chosen and what could have been chosen, between the life she was living and all the lives she hadn't. The woman in the text was her. The forest was real. The boundary was a door, the text said, and the door opened from the inside if you knew where to press. She did not go that night. She went the following week, when the third entry appeared and described, in her own handwriting, the exact coordinates of a location 2 hours north of the border territories. A place she had been to once as a child with her mother, when they had gone to gather autumn mushrooms and her mother had paused at the tree line and said nothing for a long time and then put her hand on Lena's shoulder and said, "We don't go past here." She packed a bag. She told Petra she was going to collect medicinals. She drove north in the early gray morning with the journal on the passenger seat and her hands careful on the wheel, and she thought about Cade Draveth for the first time since the haul, not about him as the man who had denied her, but about the fact that the bond was still there, 3 weeks later, exactly as strong as it had been the first day, like a compass needle that pointed only in one direction regardless of how many times you spun it. She thought he said it would fade. She thought he was wrong about that. She thought, I wonder what else he is wrong about. The forest was exactly as it had been when she was 9 years old, which was to say it was wrong in the specific way of places that do not age. The trees were old-growth pine, their trunks so wide she couldn't have gotten her arms around them, their canopy so dense the light came through in shafts rather than as light at all, golden columns that moved slowly as the morning moved, like the interior of a cathedral that hadn't learned it was outdoors. She found the boundary the way you find a door in the dark, not by sight but by touch. She was walking and then she wasn't walking because something was different about the air in front of her, thicker, pressurized, like the moment before a storm breaks except that it was completely silent. She reached out her hand. The boundary hummed against her palm. She pressed. The forest folded. What opened on the other side was not another forest. It was the same forest, but from a different angle, the way the same room looks different when you change the position of the mirrors. The trees were still there. The shafts of light were still there. But the shadows fell differently, and the smell of the air was different. And when she looked down at her feet she could see, in the soft loam, footprints that were her own shape but had been made in a different season. There was a version of her standing at the tree line. Lena stopped. The other woman stopped too, though she was 100 feet away. They looked at each other across the space between them. The other Lena, she understood almost immediately that this was what the journal had meant, other versions of the world, was wearing the emblem of the Ironville Pack, not as a visitor. As a member, the thread was silver-black, the mark of a bonded Luna. Lena's stomach moved in a way that was not quite grief, and was not quite anything else she had a name for. "You're here," the other woman said. "I'm here," Lena said. "How is it," the other Lena asked, "where you come from?" "Quiet," Lena said. "He denied me publicly, in front of his entire council." The other woman was quiet for a moment. She looked at Lena with something that might have been sympathy and might have been relief and might have been some complex alloy of both. "He didn't. Where I come from, he didn't. But there are others." She glanced back over her shoulder toward where the boundary would be behind her. "There are others where he's worse, and others where he never existed at all. And others where you," she paused, "where you chose not to wait for any of this." "What's in the book?" Lena asked. The other Lena looked at the journal in her hand and her expression changed. "The book isn't the point," she said, and there was something careful in the way she said it, something deliberate. "The book is the door. What you're supposed to find in here isn't in the pages. It's in what the pages show you." "Which is what?" The other Lena smiled. It was a good smile, warmer than Lena's own felt from the inside. "Who you are without him." She spent what felt like 3 days inside the boundary. Though when she came back out, the sun was only 2 hours past where she'd left it, and her car was exactly where she'd parked it with the heater still ticking as it cooled. Inside, she'd moved between the spaces. That was the only way she could describe it later, privately, in her own journal, in her own handwriting, moving between the spaces. She'd seen 12 versions of herself. Some of them had made choices she recognized. Some had made choices she couldn't fathom. She'd seen a version of herself who had never come to the Ironville Hall, who had stayed in the border territories and opened a healing practice and married a quiet man who loved her without complication. She'd seen a version who had stood her ground in the hall, not left, not been quiet, who had been escorted out by Cade Dravith's own guards while she was still mid-sentence. That version of her had bruises on her wrists. She'd stayed with that version for a long time. Long enough for the other her to say, quietly, "I should have left the first time." The version of herself she'd thought about most, though the one she kept returning to, was the one who had never needed to be told anything. The one who had walked into the Ironville Hall not as a border pack healer's daughter with a bond she hadn't asked for, but as herself, unburdened by what anyone thought of that, upright and unafraid in the specific way of someone who has already reckoned with every version of the worst-case scenario and decided that none of them destroyed her. That version had made the choice the journal was showing her how to make. She drove home in the late afternoon with the window cracked and the cold air moving through the car, and she did not think about Cade Dravith. She thought about her mother pressing dried wolfsbane between the pages of an old journal. She thought about the word penumbra, not day and not night, not living and not gone. She thought about the boundary, how it had hummed against her palm like something that recognized her. She thought, "I have been waiting to be claimed." She thought, "I am going to stop doing that." The rumor reached her 6 weeks later through Petra, who had a network of informants that would have made most Alpha Councils nervous. Cade Dravith's chosen mate, a woman named Surith, the daughter of a high-territory Alpha, well-ranked, wolf-grade, politically advantageous in every way that a Luna was supposed to be advantageous, had arrived in Ironville to formalize the arrangement. "He's moving fast," Petra said. She was sitting at Lena's workbench eating dried apricots and watching Lena measure tinctures with the focused attention of someone trying to determine whether this news was having an effect. "The bonding ceremony is in 3 weeks. "That's his right," Lena said. "The bond between you is still active," Petra said. "The whole border territory can feel it. Half the pack healers have been asking me if you're all right because the resonance is." "I'm fine." Lena set down her measuring glass. She turned to look at her friend. "Petra, I'm fine. He made a choice. I made one too." She paused. "Actually, I want to go to the Ashwood Summit." Petra blinked. "The one in 2 weeks?" "Yes. The one where the Alpha King is attending." Lena turned back to her tinctures. "Yes, I have 3 new crossbred medicinals I want to present to the Healers' Assembly. I've been putting it off. I'm not putting it off anymore." Petra ate another dried apricot. "Okay," she said, in the voice of someone who is deciding to trust a process they don't yet fully understand. The Ashwood Summit was held in the old mountain territories, in a complex of stone buildings that had been standing for 200 years and looked at, worn at the edges in the dignified way of things that have absorbed a great deal of history and are comfortable with the weight. Healers came from 40 packs. Alphas and their councils came from the major territories. The Alpha King came with a delegation of 12 and almost no visible security, which was more frightening than visible security because it implied he didn't believe he needed it. His name was Rowan Kale. He was not what Lena expected, which was her own failure of imagination. She had expected large, which he was, but she had expected loud in the way powerful men were loud, the kind of presence that announced itself before the man arrived, all displaced air and attention. Rowan Kale was not that. He was quiet in the way deep water is quiet, and she noticed him for the first time not because of his rank or his face, but because She was coming around a corner with her hands full of specimen jars, and nearly collided with him. And he caught the jars without any drama whatsoever, and handed them back with the natural ease of someone to whom catching things is simply a reflexive kindness. "Thank you," she said. "Of course," he said. He glanced at the jars, really looked at them, not the polite look of a powerful person performing interest, but the look of someone who is actually curious. "Crossbreds. Ironwood root and mountain sage," she said, slightly surprised. "For joint damage repair in older wolves. The combination accelerates the natural process about threefold." "That's new." "About 6 months of work," she said. "I'm presenting it to the Healers' Assembly tomorrow." He nodded, and then quietly, without ceremony, "Good luck with it," and moved on. She watched him go and noticed with mild bewilderment that the bond compass inside her chest had gone completely still for the first time in 2 months. Not gone, just quiet, like it was waiting to see what she would do next, rather than pointing her somewhere. Cade Draveth arrived at the summit on the second day. She had not known he would be there. She found out when Petra materialized at her elbow during the morning healer's session and said, in a voice calibrated precisely to not be heard by anyone else, "He's here." Lena kept her eyes on the speaker at the front of the room. "When did he arrive?" "This morning. He's with Surith. They're presenting at the Alpha Council meeting this afternoon." A pause. "He looks like he hasn't been sleeping." "That's not my problem." "I know," Petra said. "I'm just telling you." She didn't see him until the afternoon assembly, when she was in the open courtyard between the main hall and the healer's wing, reviewing her notes and eating a late lunch alone at one of the stone tables. She looked up and he was there, 20 feet away, standing with Surith and 2 council members, and he had already seen her. Their eyes met. She held the gaze for exactly as long as was natural, and then returned to her notes. She heard his footsteps cross the courtyard. She did not look up. She kept her eyes on her own handwriting and turned a page. "Lena," his voice. "Alpha Draveth," she said without looking up. A pause. "Are you presenting at the summit?" "Tomorrow morning." She made a notation in the margin. "I didn't know you'd be here. I didn't know I needed to inform you of my schedule." She said it without heat, without sharpness, just the flat factual thing it was. She heard him exhale. She could feel, even without the bond compass, that he was off balance. There was something satisfying about that, in the way of things that aren't particularly kind but are true. "I want to talk about." "There's nothing to talk about," she said. She did look up then because she had decided it would be stronger to look at him than to avoid it. He looked, as Petra had said, like he hadn't been sleeping. She noticed that and put it away somewhere. It wasn't her concern. "You made yourself clear. I'm not confused about where things stand." "The bond is your problem to deal with," she said, "not mine." She returned to her notes. "Enjoy the summit, Alpha Draveth." He stood there for another moment, then he walked away. She kept her eyes on the page until she was sure he was gone, and then she sat back and breathed carefully for a few seconds and watched a hawk circle above the mountain ridge to the east and thought, "I'm all right. I'm going to be all right." What happened the following morning was not something she had anticipated, which was, she later thought, exactly the point of it. She presented her research at the Healers' Assembly to a packed room, more packed than she'd expected, because word had apparently spread through the Summit network that a border pack healer had something genuinely new to show, and genuinely new things were rare enough to draw a crowd. She walked them through the medicinal crossbreeding process, through the trial results on 3 packs worth of older wolves, through the projected applications. She was, in front of rooms like this, someone she recognized fully, competent, clear, unafraid of questions. This was her territory and she moved through it easily, and when the session ended the applause was long enough to be embarrassing. She was gathering her materials afterward when she became aware that she was not alone at the front of the room. She turned and found Rowan Kale standing there with 3 of his healers. "That was exceptional work," he said. "Thank you," she said. "I mean that specifically." He gestured to his healer on the left, a sharp-eyed woman of about 50. "Myra has been working on the joint damage problem for 2 years. We haven't gotten anywhere near 3-fold acceleration." "The key was the ratio," Lena said. "Everyone has been using ironwood root as the primary compound. I inverted it." Myra was already looking at the notes like a woman calculating how quickly she could replicate the thing. "Would you be willing to share the formula?" "That's why I brought it," Lena said. Rowan Kale studied her for a moment. "I'd like you to consider a formal consultation with our pack healers," he said. "Paid on your terms, however long makes sense." A pause. "You clearly have an approach to crossbreeding that we've been missing." She looked at him. He was entirely straightforward in the way of someone who has learned that the most efficient use of power is simply to say what he wants, and then let the other person make a real choice. She found that, after months of navigating the kind of power that concealed itself behind polished words and careful denials, completely extraordinary. "I'd be open to that," she said. He nodded. "Good." He moved to leave, then paused. "You know," and she had the sense he was saying something he hadn't planned to say, "in 30 years of summits, I've seen maybe 4 presentations I'd call truly new. Yours was one of them." He left before she could respond. She stood in the empty assembly room for a moment with her notes in her arms, and the morning light falling through the high windows and something settling in her chest that she recognized, with some surprise, as simple, uncomplicated pride. Not borrowed pride, not reflected pride, not the pride of being chosen by someone important. Just her own. She heard the confrontation before she saw it. She was coming back from the evening healers' dinner, walking along the corridor between the guest wing and the main assembly hall, when she heard Cade Dravith's voice behind one of the half-open doors, raised in a way she had never heard it raised before, stripped of its usual smooth control. She didn't stop to listen. She would have walked past. But then she heard her name. "Lena Asheville isn't a threat to anything." "She's not a threat," another voice said, and she placed it, one of his council members. "But the Alpha King doesn't make formal consultation offers to border pack healers, Cade. Not unless he's—" "She's brilliant," Cade said, and the word came out of him like something he'd been holding down for a long time that had finally found a gap. "She always has been. I know that." A silence. "Then why," the council member said, "did you stand in front of 200 people and deny a bond that half the room could smell?" She moved away down the corridor before she heard the answer, because she found, to her own quiet surprise, that she didn't actually need to know it. The why of what he had done had been, for 2 months, a door she kept returning to in her mind, pressing on it, trying to understand what was on the other side. And she understood now, standing in the stone corridor of an old mountain building with the sound of distant dinner conversation, and the smell of pine coming through a narrow window, that the why didn't change anything about what she had decided. She had been in the spaces between. She had seen what she was without him. She knew now that she did not need the door to open. She had already found the thing on the other side. The Alpha King's bow was not theatrical. That was the first thing anyone who told the story afterward mentioned, that it was not a political gesture, not a performance for the watching council and delegates and Cade Dravith standing at the edge of the courtyard with his chosen mate and the ruin of his own face. It was simply what a man does when he means it. It happened on the last morning of the summit, in the open courtyard where they held the formal closing ceremony. Rowan Kale stood before the gathered assembly to deliver the closing address, and when it was done, he departed the dais and came directly to where Lena was standing with Petra, and he stopped in front of her and inclined his head, a slow, deliberate, full bow, the kind that in wolf culture was reserved for the profound acknowledgement of another's worth, and said, loud enough to carry. The Kale Pack would be honored to learn from you. The courtyard went quiet. She was aware, in her peripheral vision, of Cade Draveth going very still. She was aware of Petra beside her making a small sound that was either the suppression of a laugh or the suppression of a sob, and might honestly have been both. She was aware of her own heart, which was beating steadily, not frantically, not with the particular ache of the bond compass that had been her constant companion for 2 months, but with the simple, even rhythm of someone who is standing exactly where she is supposed to be standing, in a life that is entirely her own. She looked at Rowan Kale and inclined her head in return, the equal response, peer to peer, and said, "The honor would be mine." Later, after the courtyard had filled back up with conversation, and the moment had diffused into the general noise of the summit's end, Petra found her by the horse stalls where Lena was checking the tie on her pack. "He's still standing there," Petra said. Lena didn't ask who. "That's his business." "He looks," Petra paused, searching for the word. "He looks like a man who just understood something he should have understood 6 months ago." "Good," Lena said. "Don't you feel?" "Petra," she turned. Her friend's face was concerned and hopeful and slightly lit up in the way of someone who wants a specific ending. "I feel exactly as good as I look, which is fine, which is enough." She smiled, and it was a real smile, the warm one, the one from the other side of the boundary. "He made a choice. I made one too. Mine turned out better." She put her pack over her shoulder. The bond compass in her chest gave one slow, almost questioning pulse, like it was checking in on her, and she acknowledged it the way she acknowledged most things now, noted, present, not in charge. She walked toward the gate. She sent the consultation agreement to the Kale Pack offices 3 days after the summit, signed on all the correct lines, with a cover note that was professional and brief. She arranged her border territory practice to allow for monthly travel. She told her mother, who listened to the whole account and then said dryly that she had known from the age of 6 that Lena was going to turn out like this. The kind of person who misread the obvious thing right up until she couldn't anymore, and then handled it better than anyone. "You're talking about the bond," Lena said. "I'm talking about the journal," her mother said. "I've been wondering when you'd open it." She poured tea. "What did you see in there?" "Myself," Lena said. "Different versions." And I picked one." Her mother handed her a cup. "Good." Cade Draveth came to the border territory 2 weeks later. She was in her workbench room when she heard the car, and she knew the sound of it the way you know some sounds below thinking, like your name called from the next room, like a door you grew up with. She put down what she was holding and wiped her hands on a cloth and went to the window. He was standing in the yard, not in alpha dress, just ordinary clothes, nothing declarative about them. He looked smaller outside the hall. Not small, just human-sized. She went outside. They stood about 10 feet apart. The evening light was coming in low from the west, the kind that made everything look amber and temporary. "I don't know if you'll hear me," he said. "I'm here," she said. He was quiet for a moment. She watched him try on several beginnings and discard them. She felt distantly the bond compass stir in her chest, and she acknowledged it the same way she always did now. Noted. "I was afraid," he said finally. I know that's not an excuse. It's just what it was. You were a border pack healer's daughter, and I was an alpha with a council and a territory," and he stopped. "I told myself the bond would fade, because I needed it to fade. And I said it in front of everyone, because if I said it in front of everyone, then it was true." "But it wasn't," she said. "No. And it didn't." "No." He met her eyes. His own were the color she remembered, gray-green, not beautiful so much as real. "What I did to you in that hall was wrong. I knew it while I was doing it. That doesn't," he shook his head. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know that I know." Lena looked at him for a long time. The amber light moved. A horse shifted in the paddock. "I know you know," she said. "I don't doubt that." He exhaled. Something in him that had been held for a long time let go. "The Kale pack," he said, and it was a question and not one. "I'm consulting with his healers," she said. "It's good work." She paused. "He's a good man." Cade nodded slowly. "I know." He said it like he meant it, which she thought was maybe the most honest thing he'd said to her in the entire short, strange history between them. She thought about the spaces between. She thought about the version of herself that had stayed in this yard, in this territory, in the orbit of a bond compass that never stopped pulling at her, and the version that had built something from her own hands, outside of that pull, in the open air of her own choosing. "I'm not coming back," she said, not unkindly, "to whatever you're not asking me." "I know," he said. "But I'm glad you came." She meant it. "It mattered to me what you said." He stayed another 10 minutes. They talked about the medicinal crossbreeding research, and he asked questions that were actually good questions, which surprised her a little, and she answered them. It was the most natural conversation they had ever had. When he left, he offered his hand and she shook it, and his grip was firm and brief and unperforming. She stood in the yard after his car was gone and watched the last of the amber light drop behind the ridge to the west, and listened to the evening sounds of the border territory, the horses, the distant creek, the high whistle of a bird she'd never learned the name of, and she felt, all the way through, the way you feel when something that has been waiting for a long time is finally finished waiting. The bond compass was still there. She imagined it would be there for some years, maybe longer. But it was quiet. And she was not. 6 months later, her crossbred ironwood and mountain sage formula was in use across 47 packs. The paper she wrote with Myra, the Kale pack's head healer, who had become, in the way of working closely with someone good at their work, a friend, was read at the Interterritorial Healers Congress and generated more discussion than anything presented there in 15 years. Rowan Kale thanked her at the conclusion of the Congress with the same directness with which he did everything. "You changed what we were able to do for our older wolves," he said. "I won't forget that." "Good," she said. "Don't." He laughed, which was a sound she had heard rarely enough that she noticed it when it happened. His laugh was low and unguarded and entirely without performance, and she noticed, with no particular alarm and no particular urgency, simply as one notices a new quality of light, that she liked it. Petra noticed her noticing. Petra noticed everything. "Well," Petra said that evening, over wine in the Congress hotel room with her feet up on the bed and an apricot in her hand, watching Lena with the expression of someone who has been proved right about something they didn't even know they were betting on. "Look at you." "Be quiet," Lena said. "You look different," Petra said. "You've looked different since the summit. Since you came back from wherever you went in the north." "I went to collect medicinals." "You went somewhere else," Petra said, not unkindly, "and you came back having figured something out." Lena was quiet for a moment. Through the hotel window the Congress city sprawled out against the dark, its lights scattered and warm, each one a small claim against the night. She thought about the journal. She thought about the boundary. She thought about the version of herself she had chosen, not claimed, not bestowed, not arrived at through the love or recognition of any person above her station. Chosen, by her own hands in her own time. "I figured out who I was without him," she said. Petra was quiet too for a moment. Then, "And who are you?" Lena looked out at the lights. "Someone with good work to do," she said, "and the sense to know what it's worth." She set down her wine glass and picked up her notes for tomorrow's session, and Petra ate her apricot and didn't ask anything else, because some things, when said clearly in the right light, don't need anything added. The bond compass in Lena's chest gave one small, quiet pulse. She acknowledged it as always, noted present. And then she got back to work.